Hi, and welcome to the Saved, Healed, and Made Whole podcast, where holistic health really can be simple, affordable, and attainable for you and your family. I am your host, Kayla J. Esteban. I am a biblical naturopathic doctor at Sozo Holistic Healing, where I work with natural-minded moms to find healing in mind, body, and spirit. So go grab your favorite cup of herbal tea, take a deep, relaxing breath, and we'll get started. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, my impression of the whole monthly cycle was that there were just very few inconvenient days while I was on my period that I just had to tolerate every month until it was over, and then I could just kind of return back to normal life, right? And I was kind of vaguely aware that I would ovulate at some point, this was what we learned in health class, so I knew it, but I didn't really think that that was any concern for me, and I wasn't really planning on paying attention to it until I was ready to have kids. And I don't know if you can relate to feeling this way, but it wasn't until I learned about cycle syncing that I discovered there is so much more to your cycle than just your period being annoying and ovulation being for making babies. Like, did you know that there are certain interests and activities that you're more motivated to do depending on which phase of your cycle you're in? Like, when you're ovulating, you're more sociable and better at communicating. So if you're planning a party or looking to connect for business or something like that, whatever it is, this is a really great time for that. And when you're in the menstrual phase, it is really not a good time for socializing and partying. When you are in your luteal phase, you're more administrative and organized and detail oriented. So this is a really great time to clean out your closets or do your taxes. And I think we're because our energy is kind of winding down, we're sort of more inclined to do things that are more on the boring side. So it's a great busy work time. But if you try to do these things when you're in your follicular phase, because of all your extra energy, it might be really, really frustrating to be sitting down for a long period of time doing some kind of mundane task. So there are different things. There's even different workouts, like exercise options that are better for different phases of your cycle. And if you know these things and you're able to follow them, then that can mean that you are more consistent in sticking with your exercise goals. Like, I don't know about you, but before learning about cycle syncing, I would, have great ambitions for my exercise and then just kind of fall off the exercise wagon every time I hit my period, and I just didn't want to work out anymore and I felt frustrated. So when you can kind of work with your energy in doing kind of cross training in your exercise and catering to each of the different phases and different energy levels, it makes you able to be a lot more consistent than just doing one thing the whole month and feeling frustrated those times when you can't do that one thing. So trying to do these activities outside of the ideal time is still possible. I don't want to say like we're in this world where we have to be super rigid and can only do something at a certain time of the month, because that's not practical and just leads to a whole bunch of other set of problems as well. But when you have to go outside of that kind of natural time that you're inclined to be doing that thing, it can make you feel more frustrated, or it can just kind of mean that you need to know ahead of time going into it that you're just going to have to work twice as hard. And so when something isn't happening like how you want it to, it's helpful to understand like this is kind of going against the grain of what your body is naturally trying to tell you right now, and some things can be avoidable and some things, like, it's just okay to be what it is. But having that mindset, to me, makes a really big difference. So there are some things that we can't avoid, like, you can't you can't call somebody up and say like, hey, can you reschedule your party because I'm on my period then and I don't feel like socializing, right? Like, we can't do that. And we can't really dictate how other people are going to schedule things, but there are some things that we can control, like To some extent, we can dictate our schedule, where like a lot of household tasks are things that are in our control. Like you can plan to go over your monthly budget in your luteal phase, or meal prep extra freezer meals in your follicular phase. Like those are things that you are able to kind of work around the calendar, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen on one day. There are certain things that you are able to kind of like that need to get done at some point, right? But like it doesn't have to happen on a particular day. And those things are kind of schedulable, right? Like if your friend calls you up and says, like, hey, you want to get together? And you can tell that, like, you know, you're going to be on your period next week. You can say, hey, how about in 2 weeks? Because I'll be in my follicular phase, or in 3 weeks when I'll be ovulating. You know, like you don't have to tell them that kind of personal information, obviously. But you could just be like, hey, oh, you know what? I'm kind of busy this week. Like, what about 2 weeks from now? And just so you have that in your mind, if it's something that is able to be schedulable, you know, and then if for some reason they have to cancel, and or like they can only meet on your period or something, you don't have to be like, I have to wait a whole month until I can see them, right? Like, I don't want to get too rigid or too legalistic in any of this kind of thinking. Like, you can still do it, but just know it might be a little bit outside of what you're comfortable with or what you're kind of more inclined to do. So if we can kind of steer into that energy whenever possible, it makes life a lot easier, and kind of ride out the uncomfortable things in the best way possible, and it just makes a lot more of a flow to life. There are even certain foods that support each phase of your cycle to give you more energy and balance your hormones and moods. So for many people, many women, we crave sweet things, especially chocolate, like right before our periods, right? So there's actually hormonal reasons why you crave sweet things in that luteal phase, right before your menstrual phase. But actually, something like, I know people will say, oh, well, chocolate has magnesium. And yes, that's true, but it also has copper, and that can sometimes be problematic if you're eating too much sugar. And it, you know, not good for cavities and diabetes and things like that. So it's helpful to know that something like a sweet potato is actually one of the better foods that you can be eating in your luteal phase. And if you know that that's coming and you're putting your meal plan together for that week, you can know ahead of time, like, hey, I'll just go pick up some sweet potatoes this week or something like that. And because these sweet complex carbs, especially if it's baked sweet potatoes tend to get more like sweeter and kind of caramelized a little bit. And so that is kind of one of the more ideal foods that also has like the vitamins and minerals that chocolate doesn't have, that is going to be more supportive for your cycle heading into that menstrual phase. And I really wish that this was something that more women knew about and could be putting into practice. I wish this was something that we just taught all of our young girls in health class. Full disclosure, and sorry if it's TMI, but I haven't had a regular cycle since 2020 because I've had two babies and breastfeeding in between. And so I just recently got kind of back into that phase, and I realized how much I missed it. I felt kind of out of touch without a cycle. And I think women, like, we're made to be in a cycle. And those times when we're not in that cycle, I mean, I haven't hit menopause yet, but I think this is kind of what some women talk about in that kind of menopausal phase of almost like a feminine identity crisis for some women. It seems like, this is just from my outside perspective or observation, that it just, we kind of feel a little bit out of touch when our bodies are not functioning in that cyclical pattern anymore. And this is something that I think is really innate and inside us, that maybe we're not always consciously aware. And this is a big pet peeve of mine, because modern women are not taught to be tuned in to our bodies. Like, we have so much symptom suppression and pharmaceuticals and things. Even our hormones, like so many women get prescribed birth control pills, whether we're trying to prevent pregnancy or not. They get handed out at doctors' offices like candy almost. And they artificially alter our hormones, and this just leads us to be out of touch and out of tune with what our bodies are naturally trying to tell us. And sometimes we artificially alter our energy with a bunch of caffeine, and that combined with pharmaceuticals, like, when you have allergies and we shut down those symptoms, or when you have a fever and you take something that brings down your temperature, it just kind of puts us out of tune and out of touch with the things that our bodies are telling us, and the symptoms that are cluing us into what's happening inside of us. So I really wish that this was something that we taught in health class. I know I'm not like a homeschooling expert, but just as a side note, I am really grateful to be homeschooling my daughter, because I can be integrating this into the things that she's learning, and teach those things as she grows up. So I'm looking forward to that. And for anybody that isn't homeschooling, you have plenty of time with your children at home to be able to be teaching these things too. So this is something, just as a little PSA, I guess, to encourage you, especially if you have daughters. If you have sons, it's helpful for them to be clued into that masculine 24-hour cycle that they have. But for women, I wish if we could start a whole new generation of girls that were taught how to be in tune with their bodies. This would be a really, really great thing, because our bodies were beautifully designed by God to function in this monthly pattern. And there's this, men have a very it's that 24-hour, it's like a very consistent kind of cycle. And I think that works really well for that sort of masculine energy and the needs of like the roles of men and the things that men are kind of more inclined to do. But women, I think we have this feminine energy of like flow, and the cycle of like higher energy at certain times and lower energy at certain times, and having like following with those needs and making the most of each of these opportunities to get things done. And I would love it if we all just developed this appreciation for each phase for what it is, and to not see anything as like bad or inconvenient or something. Like, especially with the menstrual phase, it gets so unappreciated and gets kind of seen as like the enemy, or something that's just annoying that we just have to deal with until we can get back to normal life. And it's really not. Like, it really is, if you choose to look at it in this way, it is a really beautiful time to slow down and to rest and to be reflective, to plan our next steps. Our brains, we have those two hemispheres of our brains, and during that menstrual phase, those two hemispheres of the brain are more connected than any other time of the month. So it's a great time for processing deep things, for like deep reflection, for deep analysis, for journaling, for listening to that gut intuition that tells us these things. So these are like things that we can be taking advantage of when we're in our menstrual phase, instead of just sitting on the couch with a hot pad and a box of chocolate and watching movies. I'm not saying you can't do any of that, right? But there are so many things that we can take advantage of. And I think one of the reasons why we don't have so much appreciation for our menstrual phase is because of all of the toxins and the endocrine disruptors and things like that that throw off our hormones and make periods so much more painful than they need to be, and make like the flow of blood so much heavier than it should be, and causes all these kind of extra pain and inconvenience and things. And it's a really big distraction from recognizing that menstrual phase for the beautiful thing that it is. So second PSA of the episode is, if you are experiencing pain and other menstrual symptoms that are debilitating and uncomfortable and affecting your quality of life, please, 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 whether it's with me or with somebody else, there are so many things that you can do to adjust and to heal from those symptoms and things like that. So please don't settle for any kind of pain that you are experiencing during that phase. There are so many more things that I could say about cycle syncing, and I have a great appreciation for it, but I have already shared them in my cycle syncing workshop. So you can check that out. There will be a link in the show notes where you can check that out. And what I do in this workshop is I go through the basics of the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, not to get too technical, but just to give kind of an introduction on each one of them and sort of how to live your best life in each phase, using it to your full advantage so that you can be more productive in each phase. You can kind of move with your body as much as possible and not fighting against it, and where you can just be working with your body in that kind of partnership where everybody's just flowing the way that we're supposed to be. And what is also included in that workshop is how to do cycle syncing even if you don't have a consistent cycle, like if you're pregnant or breastfeeding or you have PCOS or anything else that's causing a cycle irregularity. There are things that you can do to, in the meantime, like if it's when you're pregnant or breastfeeding, to kind of carry over if you want to keep that consistent habit, or how you can kind of modify this for if you do have PCOS or other irregularities. That it really does work for everybody, or it can work for everybody if you're interested. And if you still have any more questions about cycle syncing or about the workshop, there are some details in the show notes for how you can contact me. You are welcome to set up a free discovery call if you need any more personalized support, like if you do have an irregular cycle or painful periods or other difficult cycle symptoms. Please, 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 again, do not feel like you need to just suffer and to just let it be. It's not something that you need to endure. It is completely changeable and healable, and you really shouldn't have to suffer anything that you don't have to suffer. If that makes sense. There are also some links in the show notes where you can take a look around my website and social media for some more information and free content. There is a link to a little freebie that you can try out to my Refresh Challenge if you want to try that out. That's another way just to give your body and your health and mind, body, and spirit a little boost. And thank you very much for joining me for this episode. Have a very blessed day, and I will see you next time.